and welcome to a new story from the good old days. Today I'm going to talk about a little bit of fun that I had back in, I believe it was 2001. And it was at the Ducal Prize Tournament in the West Kingdom. For those who may not know, the West Kingdom had for decades been holding various fundraisers, but most specifically Ducal Prize Tournament, to raise money to buy land for the West Kingdom. They actually had finally succeeded. It took quite a while. That was in part because of specific requirements that the kingdom wanted for the land that they were getting in terms of access and zoning and so on. So it wasn't just about money. There were actually a couple of different times that kingdom thought that they had found what would be the perfect land, and for one reason or another was not able to purchase it. There was one property in specific I can remember that was, I believe, in Sonoma County, and everybody was in love with the property, but the neighbors objected, and rather than argue and fight it out and end up with the ill will of the neighbors, we decided to go ahead and move on. But they did finally get some land. They're in the process of developing it enough to make it useful for the kingdom to hold events at. They're doing things like road work and dealing with water and sanitation and so on. But I believe that it's either already done well enough to allow for events or very, very close. Ducal Prize, though, was the big event held every year to raise money. There were all sorts of different activities, multiple tournaments of different formats and styles, auctions and yard sale type things set up. People could donate objects to either be raffled off, bid on, or just bought straight out. And the tournaments were typically something into the order of you bought a particular fighter for the day, or for that tournament rather, and so on. So there were all sorts of different ways to raise money. Now, this year they were holding a special tournament there. Now, this is a tournament that typically was held during Purgatorio. It moved around a little bit depending on availability of people to run it and so on. And this time it was held at Ducal Prize, and it's called the Pandybat tournament. So for non-Westerners, because I don't believe that there's any other kingdom in the SCA that holds this particular style of tournament. So to describe what a Pandybat is, well, in simplest terms, a Pandybat is a weapon that is more dangerous to the user than it is to their opponent. Okay? Now, there have been a number of winners throughout the years, and this can be an individual or a group, because you can enter as one person or a team or a group of people. And there are times that silliness won out over the actual definition. One year in particular, the group that entered was a group called the Orcs, and they were a group of fighters in the West Kingdom that just called themselves the Orcs, and they had, when they went to war as a unit, they had adhesive stickers of the one red eye from Lord of the Rings that they stuck on their helmet. And the year that they won with something that was known as the orchestra. Yeah, they actually made weapons that were to look like instruments, musical instruments. So somebody had a trombone that they had a thrusting tip on the end of the slide, so they could go up to somebody and stick them with the thrusting tip. The person who had a violin, the violin was made out of rattan and foam, and you could club somebody with it, but also their bow had a thrusting tip on the end of it that they could poke people with. One person had made a drum out of putting two shields together, and then they had a mace in either hand, and they were beating on the shields. And the person that was leading the orchestra used a, I believe it was a glaive as their baton. And they marched around on the field, and essentially they won and lost because, I say lost because they killed everybody else on the field. So that made them really effective, but they were so silly doing it that they ended up winning the competition anyway. Good friend of mine, two good friends of mine, Sir Gregory Falconheart and Vlasta Olveus of the Wild Hare, now known as Vlasta von der Weissenson, they won one year because they used what was called the two-man shield. They had a shield that had strapping on both sides, and each of them had an arm in the shield, and they were fighting their opponents by attacking across each other. So they won one year. And it was a few years later that I and my very good friend, Raven of Drakenheim, won. So to understand a little bit of how this came about was, I've said in some of my earlier stories that I am known as the patron saint of battle injuries in the West Kingdom. And that is because I have gotten injured while fighting in so many different ways that we finally decided that I had a weird, W-Y-R-D, like some Norse people did. And my weird was I could never get injured the same way twice, and it would never be a permanently crippling injury. It's not to say the injuries haven't added up over the years, but so there were a large number of really just odd situations in which I got hurt. And I'm not going to go into them here. You'll have to look up one of the other stories where I go through all of them. Or at least a good portion of them, especially the more unusual ones like helm surfing. But at any rate, what we did for our entry into this is I had a broad leather belt that I wore over top of my armor, and we attached a rattan handle to the back of that belt in this configuration here. So you could grab one hand on each side, and then you would steer me by moving the belt around. You could get me to back up by pulling, you could get me going forward by pushing, and of course pull one direction or the other, and I would move that direction or the other. Now, I was armed with two swords. Now, of course, all of this sounds pretty effective, right? I'm a fighter, I've got two swords, and I'm just going to be steered into attacking everybody around us. Except that, remember where that handle is placed? It's right up against my back. There's no distance between me and where the end of the handle is. It's right up against my back. So Raven, who is my wielder, because I am the weapon, is standing basically directly behind me. And I've got two swords, and I am going this to swing. And I'm using standard length broadswords. So every time I backswing, Raven is having to duck and dodge and twist to try and not get hit by my swords. And the end joke of this was, of course, using me as the weapon is, everybody knows that Torvald is far more dangerous to himself than he is to anyone else. And the funnest part of that whole thing was as we got out there and he was trying to maneuver me around to attack people, he had lost his footing during one of the maneuvers as, well as trying to dodge the swords as on my backswings. And so he lost his grip and he fell and he hit the ground and he yelled out, "I dropped my weapon!" And I froze. Because I can't move. Remember, I'm the weapon. I'm not the wielder. So if he dropped me, I can't do anything but stand there. I can't even continue swinging. I just stand there until he gets back up and gets his hands back on and starts to maneuver me again. So that was the year that Raven of Drakenheim and I, Torvald Torgarson, won the Pandybat competition. So I hope you enjoyed that story. And I'll see you again when I have another story from the good old days.